So hello and welcome everyone. My name is Sherry Mathis and I am with the ALS Association. Thank you all for joining us here today for this special week of our Empowering Your ALS Journey webinar series. Today's the first day of our Resilient Hearts Honoring and Uplifting ALS Caregivers. We understand that providing care for someone with ALS affects every part of you, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And while you give so much to others, your journey deserves care too. So this Resilient Hearts series was created to help you learn how to recognize and manage stress, practice some real-time wellness tools, and hear from some of your fellow caregivers who truly understand. So each session this week is going to offer a space to reflect, to learn, and to renew. And it's designed to leave you feeling more supported, less alone, and anchored in your own strength, knowing you don't have to do this alone. The title of today's webinar is Caring for the Caregiver, Finding Steady Ground in the ALS Journey. Before we begin, there's just a few things that we want you to know. First off, please know that you are muted and not on camera, so you can just relax and enjoy the presentation. There will be time at the end of the webinar to answer questions, and you should see a chat box feature on your screen, as well as a question and answer feature. You can use either of these options to submit questions during the webinar. All messages that you submit are only going to be viewable by the host and the panelist. And then we'll review and answer those questions with our speaker at the end of the webinar. Please keep in mind that our speakers cannot provide opinions or advice on your personal experiences, and your questions should be a little more general in nature. We do have a very short survey we are asking that everyone complete after the webinar. And the survey does appear in your browser once you close out of the webinar. The survey helps us to know your thoughts on not only this presentation, but on future topics you might like us to present on. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on our Empowering Your ALS Journey webpage within about a week. So today, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Lauren Kulp. Lauren is a therapist and founder of Tandem ALS Wellness, which is the only nationwide practice devoted entirely to supporting individuals and families navigating the emotional challenges of ALS. After serving as the primary caregiver for her own mother, who died of ALS, Lauren dedicated her career to walking alongside others facing this devastating illness. Lauren brings deep clinical expertise, firsthand understanding, and a grounded, real-life approach to her work with clients across the country. I'm going to hand it over to her, and we'll hop back on to help with questions and answers afterwards. So please join me in welcoming Lauren.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I know I can't see all of your faces, but I hear there are many of you in attendance and more will be watching the recording. So I'm thankful for you spending a little bit of your time with us today and for the warm welcome from Sherry and the ALS Association. We'll jump right in. So as she shared, topic for today is caring for the caregiver, finding steady ground in the ALS journey. Give you a little bit of a roadmap for our time together today. So a little bit of what I'm going to share is what I have found to be both personally and professionally working with pals and cows to be some of the reality that you face in terms of the emotional hurdles and stepping stones that come up. And then we'll move into talking about more specifically stress, burnout, and compassion fatigue, some of those kinds of what we see as more healthy and unhealthy ways of coping. And then we'll transition into helping you maybe figure out a few tips to walk away from here with in terms of building a self-care practice for you in the midst of everything. And then at the end, I'll leave you with kind of some of my toolkit of favorite resources that I think I've found a lot of clients really benefit from. And of course, we'll save time at the end, as Sherry mentioned, for any of your questions. So Sherry already gave me a very, very warm welcome, so I won't go into too much more of that. I'll just share a few more details that I think some folks tend to ask me about. Uh, as Sherry shared, my mother had the bulbar form of ALS. We live in the Durham Chapel Hill area. My mom attended the Duke ALS clinic, and I was her primary caregiver, which was kind of the start of all of this for me. I was a mental health therapist before this, but have pivoted into almost the entirety of my practice is working with pals and cows in their journey through this. I am also a licensed attorney. I get this question because some people see this in my credentials. So that is just another piece of kind of background training that I have. In my spare time outside of that, I play a lot of tennis. This is a lovely picture of my mom and I here. And I spend quite a bit of time trying to be an advocate for anything and everything in the ALS space as well. So. All right, so let's kick it off into kind of our first little bit we're going to talk about today. So, just a little bit of like, what does the day to day and the reality look like? And I think just like every journey with ALS can be wildly different from one person to the next, the caregiver's journey can also be that, though I do think there are some commonalities that many folks encounter in this role. You will also see, I'll mention this throughout. You may be very familiar with this or you may not, but I know the blue cornflower has come to be one of a few symbols for ALS. So you will see that throughout this slide. Not just that I love blue flowers, but this is kind of a symbol for me in the work that I do. That's also a beautiful symbol in the midst of, a not so great reality. Um, So, just to give us a little bit of a start, so ALS, as we all have probably known in different pieces, is really not just a disease of the body. It's pervasive. It impacts everything, both for the person living with it and their caregivers, just in different ways. So, I think the things that I think often don't get talked about as much is the way it does impact our identities. And then obviously for the pals and for cows, what does communication look like? That can start to look very different. Day-to-day autonomy looks very different. Relationships take a different rhythm. Our days take a different rhythm. And so I think for cows, what does that look like? Is this kind of sudden hyper responsibility that comes on out of nowhere and the displacement of a lot of other pieces of our world in the midst of that. There's also very understandably a great amount of fear, a great amount of grief, grieving in the moment, anticipatory grief, a lot of different forms of grief. Often comes with a lot of denial. And all of these stages, they're not linear. I think we've dismissed a long time ago that grief is linear. These are stages that we can go through many different times during this journey. And I think one that is also sometimes hard to hold and hard to talk about is the anger that comes up with this, and just the reality that this is something that comes in, and it's an utter loss of control for everyone involved. And so, as we mentioned, it's a double layered grief for what's happening now, and then also the fear of what's coming. And so, with that, digging a little bit more into the cows or the caregiving role, but both the gift and the weight of this. And so I think it's, in on the bright side, we can see caregiving as an immense act of love, loyalty, and responsibility, showing up for a loved one or partner, a different sense of purpose. Some will talk to me about how the singular focus or kind of the realizing what's most important to them can be hard and also a positive. Strengthen bonds through that, pride in being able to stand up for one's loved one in this way and help assure they get the care they need. And then through all of this, there can be personal growth, resiliency, empathy, and patience. Uh, these are the bright sides. There are a lot of other sides that make it really hard, but these are some that I do think, especially, um, on the outside, and when one can find healthier ways of coping, you can sense a little bit more of these gifts and less of the weight. Very much easier said than done. I will acknowledge. Um, But the invisible load, I think this is a term that at least every other, if not every client of mine who is a caregiver will probably acknowledge in some form multiple times in our sessions. So it's the 24/7-ness of it, the separation or lack thereof, really, that happens very often between becoming a caregiver and who you are outside of that. It kind of all blends together, and self can get lost in that. Physical toll, I think the ones I hear most often, though this list could be much longer, is the fatigue, the disrupted sleep, the inability to be restful. It's just kind of a hyper vigilance, a hyper survival mode, if you will, and the strain that takes on the body. It's the emotional toll, the guilt, the grief, the worry about anything and everything. There's always something to worry about as a caregiver. Frustration, and then the loneliness that comes from dealing with this, and very often feeling like nobody else could quite grasp or understand what this is like. Um, there's the social toll, as we kind of mentioned, hand in hand with the loneliness. It's the isolation, and then the loss of time for those other things that make one, themselves and know what they enjoy. And then there's the financial toll, which is a whole big piece of things. These are just some small different ways, but the lost wages, the medical costs, for some, it's the saving for a retirement together, and that's, not the reality that it's going to be that they plan for. Fewer resources, and then it's all of the administrative, getting all of these pieces in order, which I think is a whole nother piece of it. And then again, we see this word identity show up. Who am I really outside of caregiving? I'll mention here that there's a few phrases you may hear me mention a few different times throughout this presentation. I do that for a few reasons. One, I'm emphasizing them because I think that they are important. And two, I think when we are in survival mode, as one might call it, our memories are a little bit impaired. It's a little bit harder to remember everything. So things that I think are helpful, you may hear me mention in slightly different words a few different times throughout this. So let's just transition to talking about this a little bit more specifically and how this can show up. Something that I get questions a lot from clients about is, where does stress start and stop, and where does it become burnout? Where does it become compassion fatigue? How are those different? And then beneath all of that, bigger than that, is maybe I care less about what the name for it is, but what do I do about it? So we will try to address every bit of that as we go. And I will say, burnout is not a weakness. It's what happened when care exceeds capacity over time. That's a phrase I've really stuck to because I really like it. So it's when care exceeds capacity over time, not about weakness. Uh, so let's dig into these a little bit further. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to move our pictures so I can see everything on our slides. There we go. So caregiver burnout within ALS. And this slide is a little bit wordy, so bear with me. I won't read every word, but I will go over the things that I think are really important to know. So it's kind of what I consider to be a bit pervasive. It's a whole state of being that one kind of becomes, where you can notice in your body, in your emotions, and just in your overall exhaustion, you notice something is off. And it just comes from that chronic state of being on in caregiving. And very especially in these situations like ALS, where it's often long term to some degree, and it's very often high intensity because it's the loss of independence for PALS can often be very, very high. So those feelings that come, again, we're going to hit on some of these same words, but when I see burnout in the form of caregiver burnout set in, what I see is an increase in clients expressing a feeling of hopelessness for their own world, hopelessness for their pals, hopelessness for the world being any better or different than it is. I see guilt increase. So, survivor's guilt, and whether that's anticipatory survivor's guilt or after someone has passed, all the feelings of guilt, guilt about all the big things and all the little things. I forgot to do this. I didn't do this on time. I didn't do this right for my pals. Those feelings tend to ramp up. And then resentment. This is hard, I think. One of the hardest things that I work with clients about is just the natural resentment that can build when somebody always has to be on and burnout sets in. So it's being impatient when you don't mean to be. It's getting more irritated than you would over little things. And none of us, I think, get proud of it when those behaviors happen. And also, they are a part that comes with burnout. Doesn't mean we are a bad person, that we're inadequate. It's just a sign that we may be hitting burnout. And then detachment. That can just be almost like a numbing out that happens, detaching from friends, detaching from interests, detaching from our pals. All of those things can be signs that we may have a bit of burnout setting in. So I think this is an important piece here where we read about it's different than typical stress. It's not just about being tired. It's about being drained of all of our internal resources with little time or space to restore them. So our battery is running to zero, and at best, maybe we recharge it to 10, 15, 20%, but then it's crashing back down and we're not able to build it back up. So it's just the constant um, kind of degrading of our battery, and we can never recharge. And that tends to be when we see these signs of burnout really ramping up. So some of the reasons it is common, particularly in ALS, is it sets on normally quickly and it progresses very quickly and it progresses randomly at times. It's hard to know what the next day will bring in terms of a new challenge. I think relentless is a word that I hear used by cows very often. And so it's like once you establish a new threshold, a new normal, okay, we've troubleshooted this problem we're having. The next one can sometimes feel like it's just around the corner and you can't ever get in a rhythm. And then there's also the physical caregiving, the wear and tear that takes on the body, the amount of time that takes, using feeds during using a peg tube. They take a long time. They're hard to get used to. Hygiene, transferring, respiratory support. All of these caregiving tasks can take immense amounts of time and wear and tear. Then there's obviously the emotional regulation. You've got to be, navigating all sorts of challenges. I hear so often, I think how time spent in the restroom with our pals and time spent doing transfers are some of the hardest times. They're just challenging. They're challenging on the body. They're sometimes hard if communication is less available between the two of you or multiple of you. And there's all sorts of grief, fear, and exhaustion that creep in the midst of all of this. So managing our emotions amidst all of this is a whole different level of challenge. And then again, we tend to be doing this very often in isolation, with very disrupted and less sleep than normal. We're stressed about finances. And then there's just this chronic underlying feeling of a lack of control. And as you can see in the last bullet point, a lack of knowing what's next. There's no end in sight, and it's just hard to know what to prepare for. Okay. So now we'll just talk a little bit about some of what we see as the common signs. So some of this again will be a little bit of a refresher of what we had before. So we often find that it's the feeling of feeling numb or emotionally flat that results. Burnout can often feel like there's a breaker switch. So if a power goes out, we have a power surge in our house and the breaker flips, it's because everything has maxed out and it has to reset. Burnout is a little bit what happens. It's almost our body's way of saying, okay, this is too much. I can't take any more right now. And so it flips that breaker switch. And so what can happen is this feeling that comes out of seemingly nowhere of feeling totally numb, emotionally flat, You may drive somewhere and you don't even remember driving there. You feel like you're constantly being more irritable or explosive over really small things. Even though you may want to connect with others, you don't. You pull back even more because you just don't have it in you. You may find yourself crying a lot more than you did or more easily. That chronic feeling of guilt just seems to come over almost like a cloud that follows. You may have a lot more trouble concentrating and trouble forgetting things. And then there's the physical symptoms that we've talked about. And we are going to talk throughout today about lots of different coping strategies. So, what we see on the right side of this slide, these are kind of overarching ideals. These are not some of the specifics, but just to introduce some of that, I think something that helps for a lot of clients when they come to me and we talk about what they're experiencing is for me to say, I hear you and I get that. And that is so normal. I think a lot of people don't want to think they're the only person that's feeling this way or that it's strange or abnormal for them to feel this way. I will often say this is a very normal way of feeling, reacting to a very abnormal situation. So, in the scheme of things, it's actually quite normal. You're actually quite human that you're feeling these things, that you are feeling this burnout with all you may be enduring. Uh, I think it can be really helpful sometimes to maybe just have a person in your world, or maybe that person has to be you, where you can even just sit for a few moments and articulate what are my needs. In the scheme of things, maybe I make a list of 15 needs and I don't have time for more than two, but maybe that's two more or one more than you did before. So maybe even just a moment to pause enough and figure them out can be helpful. I think this is another one that becomes a lot of what I help people work through. I think a lot of us are really, really bad at asking for help. And sometimes we need to ask for help to figure out what we need. But I think being willing to move through that in a way maybe you haven't before can be what I see as a start for folks in decreasing some of those symptoms of burnout if they can add to their team, so to speak. Um, Creating small moments of restoration. I think what I think of here is very often we get so overwhelmed in the situation we're in that we just want to go through it. We don't want to stop and change anything or think about how we can do it better, especially for ourselves. Um, but really, those small moments of really small changes, even 5 minutes of doing something different, can pay dividends to helping us not feel burned out. So, stopping to think about what are some of these small ways that I can change and not just saying I'm going to white knuckle through it, because I think anyone would tell you caregiving, it's not a sprint race, it's an endurance race, it's a marathon. And so, you need to have some moments to essentially release that pressure valve, if you will, in order to be able to get back into it and be the person and show up the way you want to. Uh, that can sometimes involve setting some emotional boundaries. That could look like, I can't have that conversation right now. Would you be okay if we had that tomorrow? That's just one of many examples. Making space for your grief in whatever way that looks like, whether that's talking to a loved one, engaging in a faith practice, taking time to yourself to allow yourself to feel it and think about it. Lots of different ways we'll talk about that. Trying to find, even if they're small, small, small ways to connect with your identity outside of caregiving, remembering that self and who we are, that tie back to the other pieces of us can be almost like an anchor as we're going through all the rough waters. Fighting that urge to isolate. I think in the midst of it, very much community is a protective factor to help us get through it. And then also fighting that urge to be the superhero. I think anyone who is a cows is a superhero, and also superheroes typically need sidekicks and need teams. So remembering that we're not any less amazing as caregivers if we have other people and we have breaks. Um, So we've talked a little bit about burnout now. So I'm just going to talk a little bit briefly about where we see compassion fatigue and where we kind of see that looking a little bit different. So burnout we talked about is very pervasive. It's that too many demands on too few resources. We talked about a lot of these signs, so I won't go into that again. Um, but what we do see that very often resulting in as well is some of the irritability that we talked about, loss of motivation. We see in compassion fatigue, we see this showing up in terms of that, I would say, extra level of the breaker switch flipping in the emotional department. So, very often, burnout can be the whole body, the whole mind, the whole emotion experience. Compassion fatigue very often shows up in healthcare professions and/or in caregiving, and it is just the constant exposure to somebody else's suffering. And so, it tends to be the breaker switch for our emotions, and that's where we can reach another level of kind of feeling numb and detached, and it's where our own emotions kind of disengage, which makes it harder to empathize. If you ever feel that way, you got nothing left to give emotionally. This is maybe a sign that compassion fatigue is something that's happened. Um, and so this is another piece that can show up and is another reason that we will go as we go into our toolkit of trying to figure out how we can pick up some more tools to help us as we're navigating through this marathon. So, coping with caregiving. So, one of the questions that I will very often get when folks come to me is, how do I know what's a healthy sign of dealing with what's going on and what's a sign that it's something worse? So, we've talked about some of the symptoms. We talked about some of this, but really the answer to this is that the line between those two, between healthy and not so healthy, is subtle, and it's not the same for everybody. I think we can all probably think of some ways that might be a little more clear cut that, oh, this is maybe not the best for my health. But there's others that really it depends on the person. And I think it comes down to kind of deeper, longer term thought patterns, deeper, longer term symptoms. And so I'll give you some examples of a few of those if you find yourself questioning where you fit in all of this, and maybe some of this will resonate with you. So, some of the things that I find can be healthier ways are finding ways to emotionally express, whether that's letting yourself have a cry, letting it out, laughing. I think there's an undercurrent of I hear a lot of dark humor in the ALS world, journaling, venting. For some, it is reading. Books that have something to do with ALS to help them make sense of what they're feeling. For others, it's the complete opposite, books that have nothing to do with anything in their day to day. The other, I think I talked a little bit about this, the overwhelm and kind of the sense to just sit in the middle of the overwhelm and it's hard to do anything about it. But I think for problem solving, it can be really helpful if you or maybe someone can help you take the big giant task and break them into smaller pieces. And then maybe delegate some of those responsibilities so it doesn't have to feel like every single thing is taking forever or is overwhelming. Um, Maintaining some social connection. So even as small as I'm going to send a text to somebody that I haven't talked to in a while that I miss. May not have time or energy to talk to somebody on the phone, but even a small text. Or maybe I'm going to try out that support group that I keep getting sent the email about. All of these things I think are really, really helpful in managing that stress and feeling connected and feeling like there's somebody else that gets what you're going through. Uh, Self-care rituals, I feel like we talk a lot about self-care in different ways, but really that is something that looks very, very different for everyone. And I think in the midst of caregiving, we may have to adjust our expectations. For a lot of folks, they might laugh in my face if I said, "Oh, schedule yourself a spa day," and that laugh could come from financial concerns. That laugh could come from time, who's going to be with their pals. But I think it's about finding really, really small ways that, again, you can release that pressure valve, something small for you. Maybe you have somebody come over for an hour so you can take a nice long bath if you want. Or even just sit and read a book, or even just take a nap and know that somebody else is taking care of your pals during that time. Um, Physical care, I often hear I'm too stressed, or I don't have enough time to feed myself. Maybe there's somebody else then that can help make sure you actually have some nutritious food for yourself, to take care of you, or help you rest. Different ways that help take care of your physical body. Um, and then our last one on this page, um, acknowledging the difficult emotions, while also finding kind of moments of meaning. So, whether it's within yourself, or working with other people, friends, family, and helping ways to find some positive in the midst of all of the other hard pieces that I know are part of the day to day. And then again, I'm going to echo a few things I said in the beginning. There is no right way. You may hear some of these things and they don't speak to you, and that's okay. This is not a one size fits all. Mixed emotions of all sorts are normal. And I would say I want to normalize that, talking to a therapist, if you haven't, if you've considered it, especially bonus if it's somebody that has an idea what ALS is, can be immensely helpful. Just a neutral person that you can go and unload and talk through things with, can be a really helpful modality. I think for some, they liken it as, they've got this giant suitcase that they're toting around all week, all over their shoulder. And then when they go to therapy, they can plop the suitcase down, open it up, take out all the dirty laundry, all the things, and hopefully by the end of it, fold it all back up, put the things in they need to take with them and leave the stuff that they don't, and hopefully work through a lot of it. So that can be a very helpful piece of things in during this time. Let's talk then on the flip side about a few of the unhealthy ways I will sometimes see of dealing with caregiver stress. Again, we're going to echo a few pieces here, but I think the white knuckling it, that I'm just going to get through it and I'll talk to people when I'm done. I'm going to do this all myself. The isolation that I see that comes for that, can be really, really damaging. And I think the further that you get into that and pulling away, the more intimidating it can feel to crawl out of that hole. And you'd be amazed what just one text, one email, one visitor, one something can sometimes do to change the tone of a day or a week. Um, and then if you feel like there's this unrelenting is the key word here. I think very often it's a normal piece, I think, of being a caregiver, that we have moments of it's harder to find hope through the fog. We have moments of anger. Why did this have to happen to my loved one and I? We have moments of guilt. Why me and not, I'm sorry, why them and not me? But it's when these feelings feel like it's a fog that sets in for days, or it's such a dark fog you cannot see out of it. Uh, those are signs that this may be a cycle you're in, and you might need a little bit of help, to work through kind of getting it back out. Um, Difficulty in managing emotions. Again, I want to normalize that is part of this, but I think when it feels very intense, very unable to control it, or for prolonged periods of time, when you feel like you just consistently aren't showing up in the way that you want to, that may be a sign as well that some additional supports would be helpful for you. And then avoidance behaviors. And I think this list is not comprehensive by any means, but just continually leaning in almost to the numbing out, if you will. Such excessive screen time, spending money or time in ways that are not maybe the way you'd want to longer term, and just trying to kind of avoid reality. I think little bits of that are very normal. Again, it's a small idea of you're flipping that switch and resetting yourself to then go back in. But if it's something that you find you're leaning into all of the time, um, maybe a sign that, some additional supports are needed to help you keep going. Um, Few other ways we'll talk about here. I think physical signs. That's often what I think will bring people in, early on. Is it's sometimes easier when we notice a physical sign that's pervasive to go and get help. Sometimes for folks that can feel a little bit harder when it's, an emotional sign or a mental sign. Uh, Really dark times, if you're feeling that you're having feelings of self-harm or suicide, of course, please, I hope that you will seek out supports. There are folks that love you and want to help you get back to sunnier days in the midst of all of this. Help you find that purpose and that joy again, so things don't have to feel like that. Um, think a loss of control is definitely a normal piece of this journey, but again, feeling like it is so overwhelming that you can't make any decisions at all. You're finding a hard time managing the care for your loved one, for advocating for either of you. Those again can be signs, hey, we need to bolster up the support for both of you. And then again, trouble accepting help. This is really hard, I think, for a lot of people to work through. We all, I think, feel very independent and like we can do it on our own. But I think again, this is a little bit of a team sport, a team effort, if you will. And so, if you find yourself being really, really resistant, it might be an extra sign that bringing in some help might be a good time. So let's jump in to figuring out, okay, we've talked about all this stuff that, are hard realities. Let's talk about what do we do about it. So we're going to go through a lot of slides of different ways of kind of looking at ways to find balance in the midst of everything. So Um, as you've probably heard, as we've gone through this, mental health is a very, very important component of this piece. So when might you seek outside support? Hopefully you've gotten a few ideas of we've talked through these earlier slides, but when that overwhelm feels chronic, rather than just episodic. So maybe it lasts for a few days, goes away, but when it feels very pervasive, that might be a sign when your regular ways of releasing your valve of stress don't seem to work, they don't reset, your battery stays too low, that might be a sign as well. If you feel like the relationships are feeling strained, whether that's with your pals or other folks, that could be a sign. Uh, and then when it feels like the emotional component of it is just completely unmanageable. Um, and when that desire to connect to self or to find meaning in it all can feel, again, like there's such a dark cloud, you can barely see through to it. These are often different ways I've heard people articulate they knew it was time to maybe get some help. Um, so let's keep talking through this a little bit more here. So we're going to start out really, really simple as we talk through what could self-care look like. So again, I think the system very often is running in survival mode or overwhelm. So starting small is really the way to do it. We don't want to kind of look at every single piece of the world that may not be the way we want it to be and then try to tackle them all in one day. That's a great way to burn ourselves out in that way as well. So I think choosing one habit a day, one habit for the week or for the month to try and tweak a little bit is good. Trying to make it realistic. Be realistic about what your actual day to day is and what can you really accomplish. For folks, I think in this phase, I think basics. All right, so sleep, moving our body, getting food that feels good to our soul, and connecting with others can tend to be the most life-giving and the most paying of dividends at this phase. Uh, for some, I think scheduling it helps you protect it. It helps make sure you think about, do I have somebody else to help during that time? Do I have the means to get where I need to get? Otherwise, it can be really easy to just say, I'll do that tomorrow, I'll do that next week, and then it not happen. Um, I think mixing daily and weekly or monthly pieces together, again, those quick moments of reset, along with bigger picture every now and then when we might have a few hours, um, is a good balance. And then just checking in with yourself. If you notice yourself being a little more irritable one day, a little less patient, a little whatever, even just taking a few minutes to pause and say, okay, what is going on right now? What do I need? What am I feeling? Can help you then develop even just a really small plan forward from there. So these are just a few examples. I'm going to give you a ton more as we go, but a few minutes of deep breathing, Say, I need 5 minutes, 2 minutes. I'm going to go, I'm going to sit in my favorite chair, and I'm just going to be still and silent. Uh, Stepping outside, take a deep breath outside for a few minutes. Reach out to a friend, journal, short walk, even just for a few minutes. And then these are some of the bigger, deeper recharges. So planning a respite day or a respite few hours, and then maybe attending therapy or a support group. Um, So again, I think some of these regular check-ins are really, really helpful. You can ask yourself some questions like this. How's my energy today? What are the things I'm missing? Uh, Trying to not wait until there's a crisis. So building a team early, breaking down tasks. You don't have to do it perfectly every single time. Let some folks help you. Take some of those intentional breaks, and realize that it is normal to not have patience that goes on forever and ever and ever. You are human. We are all human. You don't have to have every single hard conversation. You don't have to figure it all out today. You don't have to pretend you have it all together. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say, I can't do that today. Um, it's okay to listen to yourself in the midst of also being the caregiver that you want to be for your loved one. And then here, I just want to normalize that uh, the grief that you also experience day to day is so real. It's so valid, um, even while your loved one is still alive. So allowing yourself to um, have grief for all the pieces of it, for your own life and how it's changed, for you and your loved one's life, the way you had envisioned it. It's not selfish. It's part of it. The more you bottle up those feelings and try to shove the cork down in it and hide it, the more pressure that builds up in that jar, and that cork just flies off. But if you can let that cork off every now and then and let those feelings out, have some air to breathe, there's not so much pressure in that bottle for it to explode at times that we don't want in ways we don't want. Um, and every now and then, just little lifelines to connect to life before ALS can help you ground into who you are and what you're going through right now. Um, and so I have made a little bit of a toolkit, if you will, of all sorts of different tips. And I will try not to read through every single one of these, but these were assembled from a lot of different folks that I've worked with over time and what helped them as a caregiver. Again, some of these are not you, and that's okay. But these are you take what you want and leave what you don't. But just like I think if you board a plane and they say you need to put your oxygen mask on before you put it on for others, you don't always get to do that as a caregiver, but finding ways to still make sure you are doing that really is key. So you can't pour from an empty cup. You gotta take care of yourself first or somewhere in there, or else you're not going to be able to sustain. So I'm just going to skim through a few of these that I think folks find help them when they're feeling out of sorts, that they just pick even one of these and even just do it for a few minutes. Um, the feeling of awe. There's a lot of studies out there about the feeling of awe. Awe will often happen for folks when we travel somewhere new. We go out in nature, we find something that makes us feel small again, and like there's a whole big world out there. There's other pieces of the world that can just kind of remind us of the small piece that we have in it. That's kind of the feeling of awe. And awe is something that can really help reframe when you're having a just a hard time in the world. So these are some examples that I think a lot of clients will tell me help them find awe. Feel the feels. That's a lot of what I was just talking about taking that cork off that bottle and finding different ways to release all the different feelings that you might be having. Activity, that's moving your body in some way, getting something on the calendar to look forward to, even if it's small. Uh, Perspective. Some people will tell me that even in the midst of all of this, some small way they can pay it forward for somebody else can totally change their perspective on what's happening. Again, connection. I can't harp on it enough. Um, something so small as sending a message to somebody you haven't talked to in a long time can change your whole outlook for that day or maybe even that week. Other feeling that's a little bit like awe is novelty. Trying something new. Change up your routine in some really small way if you can. Go sit somewhere else in the house than you normally sit. Anything new like that. I won't go through all these again, but you will get these slides afterwards. So these are just some ideas to engage with. And these are some pictures that remind me if you can remember the suitcase analogy I talked about when folks come to therapy of unpacking that suitcase and taking back what they need. So I think of this as when you've got all these emotions and thoughts in your head and you don't have any time or place to sort them out, they can look a lot like this messy pile of clothes or this tangled up ball of yarn at the bottom. And then in the inverse, you can see if you have somewhere to write it down or to talk about it, naming those emotions can help it start to make a little more sense. And so, those times when we feel really indecisive, it can feel like it's because all these emotions and things are floating around in our head, all these strings tied up together. But if you can start to name them by writing them, talking about them, anything, it can start to make a lot more sense and help you know some of the next steps to take. So wellness, I think we need to be real that when we're caregiving, wellness looks a little bit different than probably what it did when we didn't have this piece to us. We see wellness floated around all over social media as extreme fitness, extreme productivity, clean eating, this perfectly balanced life. And so I'm here to say that that definition pretty radically has to be turned on its head, at least for the time being. And so I think of it as attempting to find the balances between giving and receiving, putting on that oxygen mask for us and the other loved one. And how do we balance that? Holding on and letting go, balancing all those different forms of grief that we may have, and then showing up for the world, for our pals, for others, and also giving us time to rest, and just striving to try to add a little bit more of both sides of that into our world. And I think a few other small ways that wellness can show up again. And these are some of the things I tell you. Even a few minutes can just give us a little bit of relief and change the trajectory of the day. So, laughing at something really silly you see online, wearing something that's comfortable, feeling seen by another person, connecting with somebody that seems to get what you're going through, trying to find beauty in some piece that maybe you overlooked, and being able to say no in places if someone asks you to do something socially or something else that you just don't have the bandwidth for, maybe saying no and giving yourself that extra rest. And so I'm going to transition here and give us some of my favorite resources that I think clients have found helpful, pals and cows. And then I want to make sure I save time for us for questions. So I'm gonna run through these resources quick, and then I will also make sure you have access to these afterwards. I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of what some of these are. So if you have not already heard of a website and an app called Rune, Rune is where a lot of other healthcare providers are, and they answer all sorts of questions. It started actually for ALS, and so you can go on Rune if you have questions about mental health and ALS. I am somebody who's answered questions on there, and you can listen to some of those responses. But there's a ton of other medical providers from all sorts of different backgrounds on Rune. It can be a really helpful resource to go from your app instead of just I'm sorry, instead of from your phone, instead of just Dr. Google. These are vetted providers that know kind of what they're talking about in these spaces. That's a great resource. Up above is a link to about an hour, a little bit over an hour long video that Dr. Richard Bedlock from the Duke ALS Clinic has made. And it's all about how he is finding that folks who can engage with hope in ALS, how it actually helps all sorts of different physical health outcomes for them. It's a really interesting talk. It's linked online. You can find it. Um, there's another scale over here made specifically for the ALS community. It's called the ALS Turbocharged Living Scale. It's also been recently renamed the Hummingbird Hope Scale. And this is essentially a scale where if you've been to an ALS clinic before, you might hear very often your numbers are just getting worse, and that doesn't feel great. This is a scale that you can actually improve on over time, and it gauges a lot of the different ways that we find if you can work on a little bit, can help with coping, both for PALS and for CALS. If you Google this, you can find this, and it'll also be in my resource kit. Uh, and then a few other ones that are sometimes helpful. There's a podcast by a woman named Lori Carey, who's been living with ALS for a number of years, and she brings on a ton of really amazing guests in the community that speak to all different aspects of both caregiving and living with ALS. You can find this on most every podcast site. She has some really, really great guests on that I think help many folks I have spoken with. Bridging voice. I think for many, communication is the most valuable asset between PALs and CALs. And so if you've not heard of Bridging Voice, they're an amazing organization doing work to help make sure that PALs at every single stage can still find ways to communicate and to have fun with technology. They are a wonderful resource. And then down here at the bottom, if you haven't seen this shining lady, this is Brooke. She's a member of a group called Her ALS Story, and she shares all sorts of candid, raw humor and realities about living with ALS that I think many of my clients have found really, really helpful throughout caregiving and living with ALS. Um, Few others particularly targeted to supporting our kiddos who may be young caregivers. So on the right, you'll see a group called Hope Loves Company. This is a camp that all expenses paid can let kids go and bond with other young caregivers who are also living with somebody connected to ALS. It's something I volunteer at every year. It's an amazing organization. They also do what they call virtual hangouts during the school year. It's all about connecting kids with other kids that are experiencing the same thing so they have a place to relate to others their same age. This is also a wonderful talk by Dr. Melinda Cavanaugh about specifically talking with children about ALS at all sorts of different stages, kid stages, and working through that. And then as well, I'm also including some links to 4 different books that are specifically for kids and understanding if they have a loved one with ALS, helping them kind of make sense of it all. So these are a few great resources out there. And that is the end of my talk for today. I will turn it over to Sherry for any questions that may have come in, and I will just leave up my information here. You're very welcome to connect with me. If you have questions, you can email me. Thank you otherwise for attending and listening.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Such powerful information to watch for, and the education to watch for stress turning into burnout or compassion fatigue, and then so many wonderful tips about how to take care of ourselves and hopefully relieve that pressure valve. I loved your analogy to that burnout is kind of like flipping that breaker switch, and that things have to be reset, and that's just such a wonderful visual. There was a few people who asked if they could get copies of the slides. So I want to let you all know that they will be available on the same page where the recordings will be available. So you will have access to these wonderful slides and the resources that are on them. One thing you talked about early on was the power of acceptance as a strategy. Can you speak just a little bit more to acceptance and what that, because when you think of acceptance, usually it's like, well, excuse me. It's like I accepted a job or something you want. And so can you speak to the kind of acceptance you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of clients will come in and say they want to work from the stage of feeling like they're in denial into acceptance. And I think acceptance in my mind is kind of being able to hold two opposing things at the same time, but allow them both to exist. So it's not, I don't think anyone is ever going to accept ALS and say, okay, this is just what it is and I'm happy about it. But it's being able to hold two kind of opposing truths that this is an absolutely horrible thing that doesn't really make sense. And also, it sounds like it is here to stay. And so I don't want, life to turn into just complete unhappiness. I want to find ways to hold both truths, that this is a part of the reality, and also how do I move my world around it so I can still find ways to find joy and find hope. And so I think for most, I hear them say that when they feel like they're in denial, they it's the most complete loss of control, and it feels like they can't make sense of anything. I think for many, acceptance is moving into a place where they can acknowledge the pieces that they can't control, but they can find pieces they can control to take a little bit of their world back and start to make sense of it again in the midst of everything.
Okay, great. I have a question here that is that what are the ways to hold space for your partner when simply talking about the diagnosis makes you sad to the point of wanting to shut down and not speak?
Okay. So I think I'm understanding that the individual asking this is saying that their partner, maybe their the pals, their person living with ALS, and that maybe that person wants to open up about it, but it's harder for the cows to take it in because it's hard for them emotionally. Does that sound, am I translating correctly?
That's what I see here. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Um, yeah. I mean, I think it is really okay to articulate to your loved one that you want to be there and support them, and you hope it's okay if your own emotions may show sometimes. And I think it's okay that if that person, if you as a caregiver um, break down and cry during the midst of that, or have your own emotional moments. I think that is okay. Sometimes those moments can bring you together, even though they're hard. um, I think you can also encourage your pals and yourself to find your own other groups that also get it. I think it is incredible for pals to have other pals to connect with and get it. But I think it's also okay to tell them maybe in that moment if you can't do it right that moment and you need to wait a little bit. I think all of the above are okay. We're human, and it is a hard journey.
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah,
Just a couple more. Can you
sure.
speak a little bit to someone put in their scenario, but it's not an uncommon one where the person living with ALS um, has expressed a wish, whether that is they don't want anybody to know, or they want to always be at home, or something like that. And sometimes that reality isn't possible as the care needs advance, especially when somebody's living alone. And
Yeah.
so, there's that extra sense of guilt when you have to make the best decision you can by telling others because you need more help against the person's wishes, or maybe having to move them to a different place than living on their own, because that's just what the reality is. Can you just speak a little to that?
Yeah, those are hard conversations. There's no way around that. Absolutely. I think trying to express it in language that makes one feel as least like a burden as possible, and just helping them to understand all the different pieces of it. Again, it's easier said than done. I think most pals at some level feel like they are a burden, but I think finding ways to help them in the midst of that decision know that it's not about that. It's just about, again, it is a marathon and not a sprint, and you have to make sure that their needs are cared to for the long term. And I know we're running up on time, so I could say a lot more, but I'll stop there. But I think just trying to be intentional about the language you use and help them know it's for the greater good and not for anything other than that.
Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, there's a few more questions, but we are out of time. So I do want to move us on, and I appreciate everyone that was here. And thank you once again, Lauren, so much for this valuable information and the tips and just that heartfelt understanding of what caregivers with ALS are living through at this point, what their journey is like. So I want a couple reminders and announcements today before you go. So one is I'm really excited to announce a new resource we have for ALS caregivers, and it is called the Resilient Hearts Toolkit. And you'll find it on the same webinar page where the registration for this series is and where these will live afterwards. And that's at als.org/webinars. And what this toolkit is exactly some of the things that Lauren talked about. It is instructions for how to do those little micro moment practices that help restore yourself, even in that little bit, whether it's a breathing practice, a self-compassion practice, a grounding practice, just a variety of ways that you can do in as simple as 1 minute to 5 minutes. So it will be, so that is available to you now. You can go look at that. I hope you'll join us for tomorrow's session, which will kind of delve into some of that. We'll talk about those things and we'll walk through and practice some of those together. So I hope you'll be able to join us. There also, our Creative Pursuits program also has a caregiver offering for later this month. It's called Art for Healing for Caregivers. And that's going to be on Thursday, November 20th from 3 to 5 Central Time. For more information, you can go to the Creative Pursuits webinar page at als.org. And somebody posted here, yes, als.org/webinars is where you'll find the webinars. Also, check out our support for caregiving webpage at als.org. There's a lot of different resources where you can connect to our support groups, other resources, our webinars, as well as the Creative Pursuits things, and just some tips and things for our caregivers. Let's see. So I think that's all the announcements. Again, I hope you'll be able to join us again tomorrow. If you registered obviously for this one today, it will carry you through for tomorrow's and Thursdays. And lastly, a final reminder that you'll receive a short survey when the webinar ends here in a moment. And we really appreciate your taking a moment to fill that out. Your feedback and your suggestions are really important to us. And thank you to everyone who's in attendance today. And thank you again, Lauren, so much for this presentation.
Absolutely.
We hope you all have a great rest of your day.